Everybody. Oh, now it's recording.
Yes.
Okay. So hi, everybody, and welcome to our Zoom on COVID kids vaccines. I know this is a issue that is at the forefront of many people's minds right now. So I'm really thankful for Nicole and Marnie and everyone at JFGR for helping us pull this together on really short notice, and for everybody who joined us. And so we're a small group right now, so I'm not too worried about it. But if you have some trouble following the video of who are the panelists, you can pin our videos. So if you click at the top right on a video on the three dots, you can both hide your own face, which I find really useful because it's weird to talk to myself. And you can also pin the panelists. So we'll start by introducing the panelists, and maybe you can pin them to the top of your screen if you like. So I am Allison Bernstein. I am an assistant professor of translational neuroscience at MSU, and I study Parkinson's disease. But my interest in vaccines is that I'm a mom. And so I have two kids, one who is fully vaxxed and one who is partially vaxxed and anxiously awaiting his second dose and the full activation of his superpowers. And I've also been doing science communication since 2015. I have a blog called SciMoms, and vaccines are one of the major topics that we cover. So I have been doing this on the national stage for quite some time. So that's my interest in this. And so joining me today, we have Cantor David Fair, and I'll let everyone introduce themselves, and Dr. Eve Bloomgarten, who is a friend and SciComm and musical collaborator of mine, who's at Northwestern. She's an endocrinologist, and she also does SciComm, and she's the founder of Impact. She can tell you about that. And then we have Dr. Jenny Bush, who is a pediatrician here at Cherry Health, director of pediatrics, I believe. And Brian Hartle, who's, did I pronounce your name right? Hartle?
Yeah, that's great.
Who's from the Kent County Health Department. So if you guys want to say anything else about yourselves, we can do that now. Or not.
I'm also a mom who believes in science. I have two fully vaxxed teenagers and 1,000 patients to share experience from.
I'm also a mom who believes in science. I have one partially vaxxed 6-year-old and one almost 5-year-old, so we're getting close. And as an endocrinologist, I fight misinformation 24/7 for the last decade. So that's kind of where I come in here.
I'm a dad with 3 kids, 2 teenagers and a 12-year-old. We're all fully vaccinated. I've been working on COVID for the last year and a half plus with surveillance of cases, investigations into individuals who have COVID, and also working on COVID-19 vaccination to our community, along with Dr. Bush, getting vaccines out to those who have access issues, working on community clinics and churches and schools and mobile units and things like that. So a lot of my work has been involved with that for the past 8-10 months or so.
Awesome. Cantor David, do you want to say anything? Or just you're the Cantor?
I am the Cantor of Temple Emmanuel and Congregation Ahavas Israel. And if you're not familiar with what a cantor is basically the same thing as a rabbi, except the cantor sings and creates the musical culture of a congregation and gets kids ready for their bar and bat mitzvah. And I direct choirs, but I do an enormous amount of pastoral care, and we do Torah study. And I am the director of the United Jewish School, and that is my function today, which is that I believe in education, and I believe in having resources to turn to prove our points.
Awesome. Okay, so we did collect questions. I think not everyone who submitted questions is actually on the call, so I'm very glad that we're recording this so we can share that with them later. So I'm going to start with the Cantor so that he can run to his very important meeting for UJS. So to start, I know that I'm not going to remember what these acronyms stand for. The URJ and the USJC, the governing bodies of reform and conservative Judaism, have very strong statements encouraging mandatory vaccinations for their Hebrew schools and camps, et cetera. And they really do encourage us to educate communities about scientific evidence and Jewish values in support of vaccination. So the reason I invited you to join was so that you could talk about those Jewish values and perspectives on vaccines from that perspective before we get to the science part of it.
Well, I'm really happy to do that. So a very important Jewish value that actually separates us from some other religions is that Judaism places a very high level on the concept of choose life, or pikuach nefesh, not to be confused with a certain political concept here. What I mean is that we have to do whatever we can to save lives. Human life is a gift from God, and we need to go to the ends of the earth in order to preserve a life. So what pikuach nefesh is used for in practical circumstances is, for example, if an Orthodox person, let's say an Orthodox woman on Shabbat is having a heart attack, she absolutely not just can, but is obligated to pick up the phone, call the ambulance, get herself to a hospital. The preservation of life circumcedes everything. Okay. Yeah, and that's why, for instance, in Judaism, we don't place a very high value on voluntary martyrdom. So what that means is that we don't abide killing yourself for a good cause. We don't abide killing yourself for any reason. You need to choose to live. So, okay. Yeah, and if there's a chance that you can save someone's life, you're obligated to do so. And I'll put this into a practical sense. I went to Ace Hardware today. I don't want to put on my mask. I hate putting on the mask, but I have to because God obligates me to do whatever I can to save a life. And yesterday I went and I got my booster. And did you think I wanted to be sitting in Walgreens? No, but I am obligated to save lives. I'm obligated by God. I have 4 more points. Guarding your own health, that is we call that a mitzvah. That means that even if you don't want to take care of yourself, you're obligated to take care of yourself by God because your body is a gift from God. So what I mean by that is that you are not the owner of your body. God is the owner of your body. God gave you life. Your soul is inhabiting a vessel created by God. So you have an obligation to take care of yourself. And again, get the vaccination so that you take care of yourself. Your body is a holy vessel and you are made in the image of God. We call that concept being B'Tselem Elohim. If you're made in the image of God, then you have to take honor in this image and treat your body as a holy vessel. In Kabbalah, in mystical Judaism, we say that your soul chooses the body to be born into, and your body takes you along the life that your soul chose for your life. The life that we have is a life that our soul chose to have. And if you treat yourself and other people's bodies like crap, you are disrupting God's plan and your soul's plan for your body. Rabbi Moses Isserlis, who's a 16th century rabbi, he had very clear instructions on if there's an epidemic. If there's an epidemic that breaks out in a city, you must leave the city at once so that you do not cause the plague to spread. By leaving immediately, you prevent spreading of a plague, and you have an obligation to secure the safety of your children, which is, of course, every parent's obligation. And Rabbi Yeshala Halevi Horowitz, known as the Shelah, he writes that any parent who doesn't move his child out of a city plagued by an epidemic is held responsible for their fate. So I relate this a lot to COVID. You have a responsibility to get yourself vaccinated so that you do not spread the plague around the city. It is your responsibility to take care of other people. Otherwise, you are held responsible. Now, of course, if one gets COVID and you have been vaccinated, that is not what we are talking about. We are talking about the recklessness of saying, I don't want to get vaccinated, so I'm going to put other people's lives at risk. My feeling is if you don't want to get vaccinated, fine, just don't ever leave your house. No one's saying you have to get vaccinated, but you don't have a right to spread that to other people. And the last thing I'll say is that at the United Jewish School, we require all children to submit records that they've been vaccinated from smallpox, polio, hepatitis, etc. My hope, now I don't make the policies, that's for my board to make. My hope is that in a year or two, it will be absolutely required that every child be vaccinated against COVID for the exact same reasons that we can all agree that we should have the other vaccinations, because we don't want to cause another pandemic. So that's all the Jewiness I got for you all tonight.
That was so Jewy. I love it. I especially love the 16th century rabbi who had those words, and we didn't even have germ theory. Like we didn't have, it was a miasma. Like nobody knew what was causing it, but they knew, like it's not new what we need to do to control these things, right? Distance, don't breathe on people, don't breathe the same air, right?
This is like ancient common sense to me.
Yeah. And then my second question is much easier, I hope. So when Noah got his vaccine and I like broke down in tears of relief, like I get emotional just thinking about it. What prayer should I say?
Well, there's a wonderful prayer that we say in the morning liturgy, and I'll tell you the translation before I tell you the Hebrew. It's, praised, blessed are you, Adonai, who heals all flesh, working wondrously. And this is a prayer where we thank God for waking up every day and having our veins and arteries and organs working properly. And that prayer is Baruch Ata Adonai Rofei Chol Basar Umafli La'asot.
Amen. I love it. Okay, I will let you go to your UJS meeting.
Oh, well, everyone, I just want to thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for caring about all of our children. And I want to wish you all a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we get to the science part. So the first question that came in was a question that I put in the category of like, why do we need this vaccine for kids? So generally speaking, we know that children who are sick with COVID typically have a milder disease than adults, especially older adults. So do we really need to vaccinate this population? And so from the three panelists, whichever one of you wants to jump in, I thought maybe we could start with Jenny, since you're a pediatrician and have probably seen this firsthand.
All right. I can probably think of about 10 different reasons, so I'll stick to just a few so that I can leave some for others to throw out there too. But so many children are getting more sick than the community is recognizing. There have been kids in our children's hospital here locally that have been on ECMO, which is like the most severe form of life support, where not only are you ventilated, but your blood has to be taken out of your body to be oxygenated and do the function of the liver and the kidneys and do everything to it and put back into your body. So that's like the sickest of the sick people. And we've had children in our community on ECMO for months and then released back to us. I mean, in our clinic, we've had a teenager that had that experience, and thankfully she lived through it, but still has really severe deficiencies to this day, still having to go to physical therapy, still hoping to be able to walk again, really, really sick from it, not to mention the kids that have been lost. So while the most sick kids have the highest risk of having that happen, there have also been plenty of stories of perfectly healthy kids that have had this. It is much less than adults. And I don't want anyone to walk around with horrible fears for their children because it's not very likely to happen. But I feel like even if it's a rare occasion, if we can prevent that, I think we should do what we can to prevent any child from having to have that fate, any parent from having to watch their child suffer through that. So I'll start with that one. Circle back to me if ever after everyone else goes.
Sure. I mean, I always defer to the pediatricians for that perspective for sure. But as someone in the medical world and as a parent, I think there's been hundreds and hundreds of kids who have died from this virus. And then the long term sequelae of this virus are just starting to emerge. And so we really don't know, I would say, the long-term effects. And now it's preventable for the most part with vaccination. And so when you look at a risk benefit, comparison, in my book, there's no question that it is a gamble that is way too high. For the last few years, I've done tons and tons of mental math and tons of logistics to avoid my kids getting exposed. And I think there's reason to do it. And even if they are fine initially, I just don't want to know or doubt, what's 10 years later, 5 years later, 2 years later. I mean, I think at this point, if they're eligible for vaccine, there's the easy, reproducible, safe, and effective intervention so that you don't have to take that risk. And with other vaccines that we have for, vaccine preventable illness, the number of deaths per year is actually a lot lower than the number of deaths that we've seen for COVID. So this isn't unprecedented. This isn't unique. And this vaccine has now been tested in so many people in in the world. Like, there's really no unknown when it comes to like what's going to happen with the vaccine. So, I mean, this data is really robust. So I think that like a lot of the arguments just fall short when you really look at the numbers. And I have empathy for not wanting to expose your children to some unknown and it's, a foreign substance. People don't love the idea of getting an injection, but truly I would say the unknown in this scenario is COVID. It's not the vaccine.
Dr. Bloomgarden, does that mental math ever come to you at 3 a.m? Because that's when I have to do the calculations.
24 hours a day.
Going to school.
It's exhausting. It is so exhausting.
Even
We're
I
so
are
close.
And even I are in a Slack together of a bunch of science communicators, and it is active like 24/7. We have a channel, what would you do? And it's literally like we just had my daughter's bat mitzvah. So it was, how do I do this safely? And just the constant calculus of your head. And so, yeah. Brian, did you have anything to add from your perspective?
As someone who kind of works with the data, I will kind of talk about it in that regard. What we've seen over the past couple of months is, a high number of cases in that younger population. And so really the kids 5 to 11, since they have not been able to be vaccinated, are in a sense kind of driving the pandemic here locally, bringing it home to parents and other members of the families, those who are unvaccinated, even the younger kids. So we're seeing a lot of outbreaks in schools, especially elementary schools. We've had over 40 outbreaks here in Kent County this school year. Last year, I would say that the majority of outbreaks we had were in high schools, whereas this year, the majority of outbreaks we have are in elementary schools. And what that means is that anyone who's a close contact of a case in an elementary school has to quarantine, required to quarantine. And so I think, the impact it has on education, social and emotional health on these kids. We know that kids have struggled throughout the pandemic. So I think this vaccine offers the opportunity to stop that, at least in part, to help reduce the number of cases we have in our community, reduce the potential for kids to spread the infection to other people who are at higher risk for complications, and really to get kids back to school and to keep them in school to help really benefit their social, emotional health, and as well as their education.
Great. And as we go, I'm going to drop some links in the chat with other resources. So the one I'm going to put in now actually is made by Eve's organization Impact. It's a Twitter link. Sorry, Eve, I didn't have a link to the direct.
Oh, I can add it in.
Graphic. But it's a little graphic about like 5 or 6 reasons to vaccinate your kids. So
I'll add in the direct one too.
Okay, awesome. And so sort of a related question. So because most kids have mild cases, Although I will say a stat that I saw recently that really was alarming to me was that 30% of kids with severe COVID have no comorbidities. Like they were perfectly healthy beforehand. So we hear a lot about, oh, people are high risk, but not that people who are high risk deserve to be sick. So that's a whole separate like ethical argument about what you're saying when you say that. People deserve health and life. But that 30% stat to me was like, wow, was really striking. So, but because it's usually mild in kids, I've heard from parents, why can't we just wait until our kids are older to vaccinate them? Like, why can't I just wait? Especially if their kid's like 10 and going to be 12 soon. Can't they just wait and get the adult one that we have more research on? And so that is the question. Why can't we just wait? Do they need to be vaccinated now, today?
Well, I mean, if you wait, you leave your child at risk, right, for getting COVID, and also everyone around them, and you give the virus an opportunity to mutate. You give the virus an opportunity to infect somebody who's immunocompromised. You increase the risk that, you know, we're going to have more kids who lose a parent, right? I mean, I think there's so many reasons that waiting is the wrong answer. I mean, I would have like given my kidney to get my children vaccinated sooner, right? I mean, like all I wanted, my 4-year-old, I'm like, be taller, be 5, you know, I mean, we're just like dying for this. And they're excited. And, you know, we made a superhero certificate to give out to kids, which I can link in here as well, that like kids are loving because it like shows they can have an impact and they can start to get back to normal, give them a little bit of control after 2 years. But I mean, every day there's risk. Like we get notifications all the time and parents are, you know, getting very tired of the quarantine thing. So there's a lot of, you know, people are being a little bit less honest, I think, about exposures. And I think there's a lot of risk right now. The numbers are going up, and Illinois, you know, we've done a pretty good job here. It's variable, but I mean, I think there are certainly areas of the country, and I think your state is one of them, where the numbers are really alarming. We can defer to the numbers guy for that one.
Yeah, we're actually seeing numbers like we have not seen before in our community. Our positivity rate is the highest it's been. Our hospitalizations are close to as high as they've been throughout this pandemic. And our numbers are continuing to go up. And, you know, I understand people's hesitation to get their kids vaccinated, but I think, as I mentioned before, you know, the potential for infections in young people to kind of keep the, you know, transmission going in our community. And I think sometimes we need to step away from sort of a, you know, thinking about the individual to thinking about our community and what we can do to impact the overall health of our community. And I think vaccination, it protects the individual, but it also protects, you know, the health of our community. And I think that's why we can't wait. You know, we're in a situation that our hospitals are turning people away that have, you know, just, you know, run-of-the-mill, infections or health issues because they have too many people in the hospitals. And so whatever we can do, little steps we can take to help improve that, help reduce transmission in our community, I think that's what we have to think about. And you know, unfortunately, because of that, it's hard to wait to get vaccinated.
Yeah, and sorry, Jenny, you jumped.
That's okay. I was just going to add that for people who are thinking maybe I should wait until my kid turns 12 so they can have the full dose. I did read that in the original adult studies, they actually found that the dose that we're giving kids now worked really great for people up until like their 30s. It worked so well that it would have been approved for older people at this dose because it shows less side effects at this dose. But this dose doesn't work good for the 65-year-olds, and they didn't want to complicate it and have so many separate doses for different ages. So that's why they approved the higher dose for everybody 12 and up, just to make it simple. But I would, if I had a 12-year-old, I'd be wishing that I could give them the smaller dose just to decrease those side effects that they're having, because it is incredibly efficacious at that lower dose. So really no reason to want to wait until your kid turns 12 to get the higher dose.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that, so I dropped the link to Eve's vaccine superhero certificate in the chat. That's the Google Drive link, and also a link to my article. And there's an infographic in there where we talk about, so I've written previously about the vaccine schedule and why it's so important and how in general, just delaying vaccine only increases your risk, because we often forget about time. Like, time is an important part of the risk calculation. And so the longer you are unprotected, you are at greater risk. And also, if you're thinking about waiting, remember that COVID gets more severe as you get older. So, right, if you can protect them now when they're young and they have lasting protection, despite the talk about waning immunity, which is overblown, I think. But you can protect them now when it's mild and not wait that time when they might get it and then have more severe disease. So waiting just adds risk. There's absolutely no benefit to it. And so I think that's a good segue to the next question, which is changing topic a little bit. So we know, right, the vaccine has now been given to billions of people, and people have had the vaccine for a year. But people are still worried, especially in kids, about long-term effects. And so what do we know about potential long-term effects? How will we know that these are safe long-term? How do we answer that question? How do we know that it's safe?
Happy to start us off, and then I can let you guys take over. Vaccine long-term outcomes aren't really a thing, meaning, any event that's going to happen post-vaccination is typically happening within the first couple of weeks after. We are way past that. So the let me wait a little longer concept is not really applicable when we have this much data and it's been so long since the initial doses were given. So that's, I think, the most important thing. And the second piece of that is really the data collection and surveillance for any potential signals in the VAERS database and in other ways as well, so that if anything even looks like it's trending towards a signal, there's a deep dive into that to make sure that there's nothing that would change the risk benefit scenario.
I would agree with that. The surveillance, we've seen it happen earlier this year when they've stopped, vaccination with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and other vaccines, when they've identified potential risks for them. And it's not like there were a lot of cases. It was like a small handful of cases of blood clots or other things that were occurring. So I think, that surveillance system is there, and it's probably one of the most rigorous safety surveillance systems that we have around vaccines. So I think people should feel confident that if there are any issues, then the FDA will stop or step in and stop things. I think one thing that, it is true that, if the side effect's going to happen, it usually happens within the first 3 weeks. I think people get concerned over the type of vaccine that it is here, the mRNA vaccine. It's a new vaccine. It hasn't been studied that long. It was fast-tracked. It was developed quickly, but this is a vaccine kind of type that's been studied for decades. It's not brand new. They've been looking at this technology for a long time. I think people concerned, they see RNA and they think about DNA and it's just going to affect my genes and things like that. But none of that is true. It basically provides information to your cells to produce a protein that is on the surface of the COVID virus. And so it's not going to have any impact upon your genetics. The mRNA that's in there will, your body gets rid of it, after a week or so. So I think, there's some concern over that, but it should not be a concern.
Yeah, I mean, I hear these things about mRNA stability, and most people in the world haven't worked with mRNA in the lab. Like I do, but I'm weird. But like if you breathe on mRNA wrong, it degrades. Like it is not going to hang around. Like it's, you have to treat it very carefully, and that's why it's in these lipid particles to keep it stable. And so it doesn't hang around. So the concern about that it's going to be in your body forever. Yeah, it's not going to do that, and we know that. Jenny, did you have anything to add? Because I kind of have a follow-up question that I think might be a good one for you.
Sure, nothing to add. Go ahead.
Okay, so if we're talking about long-term effects, and Eve kind of touched on this a little bit before, so if we're comparing like possible long-term effects of vaccines, we know quite a bit about long-term effects of COVID already. and especially in kids. I know there's some new data on that. So I was wondering if you could comment on that piece of it.
Yeah, I think the most recent I've heard is about 1 in 7 kids ends up with long COVID, meaning that they've got their symptoms for a prolonged period of time, many months. Seeing a lot of kids that are still having, I mean, I personally have taken care of a few kids that are just plain dizzy and weak 6 months after they had COVID. Like ever since then, they're just not up to being themselves, can't be as active, can't do their sports yet. So yeah, and we don't know what the long-term effect of that's going to be, if they're going to have heart problems when they get older or more severe respiratory permanent damage. We just don't have enough time with this disease yet to know what its long-term effect is going to be, but it's definitely not looking good for some people.
And I just dropped a link back in the spring when the vaccines were first approved for 12 and up. I did a Facebook Live Q&A with Dear Pandemic on this very topic of long-term effects of vaccines. So you can check that out if you like as well. So Brian, I think you mentioned that the surveillance system that we have for vaccines are very thorough, and probably more thorough than we have for any other medical intervention at all. I mean, there's multiple databases. The one that gets a lot of attention is VAERS because it's public. So that's passive reporting, but it's very useful for finding signals. But there's VSafe. So I'm going to give a little plug that everybody should register for VSafe. If you haven't, you can do it later. You can do it when you get a booster. You can do it for your kids, and CDC will send you little things daily and then weekly and then monthly, and then to monitor your symptoms. And if anything comes up, they'll contact you. And those systems that are in place are how we caught things like the myocarditis, which is a major concern of parents. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the risk of myocarditis, because both the FDA and the CDC committee spent quite a bit of time on this. And I think it's a major parent concern, especially for people with boys. So.
Yes. There's a major concern of parents, but not a major concern, or does not warrant, or should not be getting the attention it's getting in my book. And it's not really, so like myocarditis is really serious in adults and in teenagers, I think too, as well, where, we see patients who are really, really sick and florid heart failure. What this is like a myocardial transient bruise, like, if you trip and bump your knee on the basketball court and get back up. And so it's really a different entity altogether in the small numbers that are showing up, meaning, people are recovering in a couple of days. The numbers are low, and it potentially has a little bit of, we didn't see it at all in the vaccine trials for the 5 to 11-year-olds, right? And so maybe there's some testosterone mediated process, which is why the signal showed up in boys or in teenagers. But, I think the fear of myocarditis potentially is worsened by the fact that we're calling it the name of a very serious other illness that actually we see a lot with COVID, right? And with other viruses. So viral myocarditis is much more severe, and that's, the pathway to heart transplant sometimes. Vaccine-induced myocardial injury or bruising, I would say, is a very different entity, and is typically, take some NSAIDs and come back in a couple of days. And so, I think the numbers are tiny. The numbers are astronomically higher for the actual infection, and the term myocarditis is just alarming.
Did I also hear that they expect that it will be less in this age group because of hormones? Is that also true?
I did sneak that in. Yeah, I don't know if Jenny has anything to add to that one.
I don't.
Okay, the other major long-term concern that parents have, and more for girls, is concerns about fertility. Like, I am hearing this from my friends a lot. They're like, please tell me that I'm still going to be able to have grandchildren someday if I give my kid this vaccine. So parents are very, very concerned about this piece of it. So
I can talk to that one a little bit. So I always like to know, whenever I hear these kind of outlandish claims, it's always just interesting to me to think, where did this come from? Because most of the stuff probably isn't just random fiction made up in somebody's basement, although I think some of it might be. But this one, I think, came from a truth that the spike protein kind of looks like a little bit of a protein that can be found in placenta and in ovaries. So somebody thought, "Ooh, this looks like this. So if we make something that destroys this, it's going to go and destroy this too." And so maybe there was a little logic in the beginning of it, but it didn't take long to study and see that that absolutely just wasn't true, that it's not attacking those natural tissues in any way at all. And if it was, I mean, we would have seen outrageous numbers of miscarriages. I mean, every person who got vaccinated would have had a miscarriage if the spike antibodies were attacking the placenta. And what we saw instead was actually that women are less likely to have a miscarriage if they're vaccinated than if they're not, because of the effect of COVID causing so many women to miscarry. So I don't know, I find that history stuff kind of interesting to see where did these ideas even come from? And then to try to weed out, it was a theory, was the theory accurate or not? And in this case, it just wasn't accurate.
And then I think there was a lot of stuff on social media about effect on periods. And so I
As a
think
pediatrician, I can tell you everything affects a period. I mean,
As an endocrinologist, ditto,
cold, their
totally.
period-
as a woman, I could tell you everything affects your period.
Yeah, it's like, okay, this is a
Even
day
more
that
true
ends in
for
day.
Younger teenagers, though, they're usually not all that regular in the first place. So if they exercise a little bit too much, if they get a little bit of a cold, if their diet changes a little bit, their periods just go wacky on us all the time. So it does not surprise me that any vaccine would cause your period to get delayed by a few days. And as long as your cycles are back to normal the next month, the following months, I don't think having a cycle off by a little bit is ever going to hurt anybody.
And so also because we have given this vaccine at this point for well over a year, I mean, if we start with the initial trial subjects for billions of people, that's billions of doses, like we would know by now.
And there's so many people who have had successful pregnancies while getting vaccinated, and so many people who have gotten pregnant. And, I think, severe illness really disrupts your period, right? So critical illness, that turns off first. And so, there are signals and things work for a reason and stress responses. But I think the other aspect of all of this is like parents and, women of reproductive age were directly targeted with this piece of misinformation, right? I mean, this is something that was, maybe there was a kernel of truth at the start. It got taken kind of over by, I would say, certain groups that like really put this out there as fact, and it caused a lot of harm. And I would say most people are victims of these these disinformation spreaders, really. And so you don't want to be a victim, right? So like what I always tell people is like, if you are pregnant, if you know someone is pregnant, the best thing you can do is go get them vaccinated tonight, right? Because pregnant women are in the ICUs all over the country with COVID. And it is a high risk state, and it is the worst, absolute worst outcome. The horror stories coming out of the ICUs. You just like, if you see someone on the street who's pregnant, like go get them vaccinated, right? Like that's the best thing you can do right now. Like it's seriously. And I think like they're safe. There's no risk there. There's no infertility risk there. There's no biologic plausibility at this point. And I think we have to look at the whole picture.
So I'm actually going to jump, because of where this conversation went, to a question that came in that I was saving for the end. But we've touched on the topic 2 separate times at this point, so I'm going to jump ahead. So someone said that there are conspiracy theories out there about whether the vaccine contains agents implanted by the government. We have 5G conspiracies. We have tracking devices. It's going to be like devices literally deliberately created to mutate your DNA. And so the question was, where did this come from? And is there any truth to it? And so I want to just answer the second part of that no, there's no truth to any of these, but it really capitalizes, like you said, Jenny, on like fears that people have, like little nuggets of truth, and then people's very real and valid concerns, right? And so these people who spread the disinformation, they really like know how to get into hijack your emotions, right? And hijack your fears. And so there is not a single piece of COVID. I can't think of a single piece of COVID misinformation or disinformation that is not a recycled piece of like anti-vaccine conspiracy theory that has been in the dark corners of the internet before now, and now it is out in the daylight. So I just really wanted to answer that one for my personal interest of being involved in fighting misinformation on social media. I don't know if Eve has something to add to that, because we've worked on some things together fighting
Oh
this.
boy. So it was like my third talk about misinformation today. Meaning, no, because it's such a big it is such a big problem. And so part of it is, again, this like the dirty dozen or the, the top 10, or like there are people who are making millions of dollars by convincing you to not do what is in your best interest or your kid's best interest. And so understand the sources, don't share information without fact checking it and making sure it's reliable.
Can you say that one again?
Oh, yes. What did I say? I hear you.
Oh,
Don't share information without fact checking it. So, I mean, there are certain things, social media has, is a wonderful tool when used well, but it is a weapon when used, to dominate the information sector. And when people start sharing things without really fact checking them or really validating them, we get these corners of these platforms that are, wild. They're wild, and they're causing direct harm, and somebody is making a lot of money or is benefiting in some way, right? So, and I think like the best thing we can all do is to not share things that seem incredible or that you haven't checked. You want to maybe start to educate yourself about these anti-vax tactics and almost like pre-inoculate yourself against being swayed by misinformation, because they are hijacking your emotions and they are taking advantage of all of us, right? They are preying on your worst fears that you're going to cause your children to be sterile, or you're going to, you're going to do something like, irrevocable and damaging to yourself or your kids. Like those are serious claims. And unfortunately, we don't really have a good accountability for it right now. So, I think I always call it like a twin pandemic, is this misinformation. The infodemic is just as toxic in so many ways. And I think truly without it, we would be through COVID already, right? I think it's hard to think about, but at this point we have a vaccine preventable illness and the numbers are ugly, right? There's no reason for it.
So that
Sorry
was
to be such a downer.
fun and uplifting part of the session.
Wah, wah.
So a related question came in the spirit of inoculating ourselves and our community against not a virus, but the infodemic. Can you all give some suggestions on how we talk to people who might be hesitant or don't want to vaccinate their children? Realizing that like I give 4-hour-long workshops on how to communicate about risk and stuff, but like maybe a few little pointers just to help people get started if they are in that position, because that's part of what we do here, right? Like we teach people and then they can go talk to their on the playground, they can have a conversation. So
I think it's always good to start from a place of common understanding that we all want what is best for our children. We might think that different things are what's best for our children, but we all want what's best for our children. So making sure to not start right off with with an attack on the other person or their beliefs, but just finding that common ground first and then trying to build from there, I think is very important.
Yeah, it never goes well when you attack somebody. Always start from empathy. Your goals are aligned. I hear what you're saying. Here's what I'm saying. Here's where we're aligned, leading with empathy. I think even when it's really hard, it's the nature of, this is what pediatricians are like, amazing at.
Also asking permission to share opinions. It's harder for someone to block you out if you've said, that's an interesting viewpoint. Would you like to hear my viewpoint? And then if they say yes, they're a lot more likely to listen to what I have to say than if I just come right at them, forcing my opinions on them.
I also, like, as a scientist, I like to be like, oh, well, this paper and this paper and this paper, and let me send you this stack of PubMed links. And that is not helpful in general. Like, people want just the nugget of information that you can share that's connected to the values that you share, right? So like like I'm a mom and I also want the best thing for my kid, and this is why I chose to vaccinate them, right? I think, you know, if you are someone who has vaccinated your children and you know someone who is hesitant, like tell them why you chose that. Don't send them citations. You can send me citations. I will absolutely read them.
I think it's also important to recognize, you said somebody who's hesitant, recognizing the difference between somebody who's hesitant and somebody who is firmly opposed. And if you're talking to somebody who is really, really strongly anti-vax, I think the best thing that you can do is leave a door open for them to come back, because probably no matter what you say, they're probably just not going to listen. But if you say, I mean, me as a physician, I will say to people, I strongly recommend this for your child. I think it's the best thing you can do to help keep them safe. I get that you're not there today, but if you ever change your mind or you ever want more information, I'm here and happy to give it to you. And then just let it go at that. They don't need to hear my statistics, because the more I say, the more they're going to close off. And then that door is not open for us to communicate later.
Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the time because we are near 8 o'clock, but we did have a bunch of questions that were not specifically related to kids vaccines. So Nicole, if you're okay, I can just write answers and have you send those off to those people, because there were quite a few and I put them at the end because they're not specifically related to kids vaccines. The one last question that I have about kids vaccines is about everyone's current favorite topic, booster shots. So someone said, should teens get a booster if they were vaccinated in March and April? So boosters have been changing a lot quickly. So anyone up on the current latest?
I have heard nothing about teenager boosters even being suggested to the FDA yet. But I'll tell you what, if I could somehow get them into my kids' arms, they'd be in my kids' arms right now, because we are seeing a little, I mean, it's not horrible and most of the kids aren't ending up hospitalized, but we are seeing kids getting infections that had been vaccinated quite a while ago. So I would be happy to get them for my teenagers. Actually waiting on a results from my son, got tested again today. So hoping that that comes back negative, but I have not heard of Pfizer submitting anything to the FDA. I know we're hoping that all adults 18 and up will get approved sometime in the next few weeks, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas right now you have to have a risk factor of some sort to get a booster.
I think tomorrow.
Are they going to talk about it tomorrow?
I thought so.
I heard it was very
I
imminent.
think like boosters if you're 18 and up, probably coming tomorrow, right?
And I have two things to drop in the chat because both Eve and I have made little infographics to help you know, so that's the wrong link, if you should get a booster. So let me drop those here. And so I was wondering, like, is part of the reason, you know, vaccine efficacy, we like to think of it as only a property of the vaccine, like how good is the vaccine? But right now in West Michigan, like our cases are astronomically high. Like we're in that new color they had to build on the risk chart because they needed redder than red.
That was not an error.
I don't know. I checked 3 different sources and it's that skyrocketing thing in the last week seems to be, I mean, maybe Brian can comment on that, but the kids are also just being exposed to so much more because so many of them are in schools that are either not requiring masks or are lax about masks. And it's just so high that like, there's just kind of COVID everywhere. So sometimes it might not be waning immunity. It's just that exposure is so much more. And that's why we've taken kind of a vaccine or bust approach to stopping COVID, especially here in Michigan. We don't really have a lot of masks anymore or any of these other precautions, and vaccines alone are not going to stop this pandemic. And so that's my little plug for keeping those other precautions in place, because the vaccines are amazing. Like these are some of the best vaccines we've ever made. Like, I think sometimes we lose sight of that, like just how amazing they are. So.
And my daughter is in first grade. She's been in person in school, kindergarten and first grade with a mask mandate, and there's been 0 cases in her class. So, I mean, masks work. We do a lot of rapid home tests if there's any, concerns. And she hasn't had to quarantine in a very long time. I mean, I think like it's just not a one or the other. It's got to be both, or all 3 or 4 layers of mitigation. Because at some point, if we are not careful, like we are going to have a new, a mutation of this virus that is potentially not going to, our vaccines are not going to get us out of, and not enough adults are vaccinated to get out of this anyway, right? But like, I think we need to like push this on all fronts.
I think our concern is that our mask mandate will expire after the first of the year locally. So schools can still choose to have a mask mandate. Obviously, individuals can still choose to have their kids wear masks, but just where we're at with our cases right now, we fear what might happen, when that mask mandate is lifted after the first of the year. So,
Yeah.
So sorry to hear that. I mean,
Yeah, it was tied to just a certain number of days after the authorization and not tied to actually getting vaccines in arms and case rates. So I think a lot of parents are worried. So on that, if parents want to get their children in Kent County in Western Michigan vaccinated ASAP so that they are fully vaccinated by the time that mask mandate expires in January, where can they go? And this is my question for Brian. Where should we go to get our kids vaccinated?
well, we have lots of options. And I know at the health department, we have hundreds of appointments available over the next, several days. I know Dr. Bush has been working, and Cherry Health has been working with schools to provide vaccines directly at schools. We have a vaccination clinic this Saturday at our Sheldon complex, which is on Franklin Street. And I will be there from 10 to 4. So yeah, there's ample opportunities to get vaccinations. I think that we received at first, when it first was approved, the supply was limited. We didn't have a lot of vaccine, and most health departments had it, and some providers had it, but we got a shipment last week of 30,000 child vaccines, and so we've been distributing those because we're like the distribution hub. So we've been sending them out to providers across the county, and so that problem with supply should be taken care of. And if people need more, we've got more. I think we've distributed about half of it, so we still got like 15,000 doses here. So people should be able to get it now by calling their physicians, calling pharmacies, calling health departments. It shouldn't be a problem to get it now.
And I see that Jenny dropped some links for Cherry Health in the chat. I went to my kid's pediatrician because my son has Eve knows pretty severe needle phobia. They bonded over it. They sent each other little videos,
so do I.
helping each other out. It was really cute. And he just felt more comfortable there. But it's not the Wild West that it was in the spring when adults were trying to get vaccinated. Like, the supply is there. So there's pharmacies and pediatricians and all these health clinics. And I love the vaccinefinder.org link and vaccine.gov because that is,
They actually take you to the same place eventually.
yeah. But there's lots of ways to find them.
We're also doing vaccines in the Grand Rapids Public Schools. So every Grand Rapids Public School elementary, sometime in the next 3 weeks, we'll have a clinic where the kids can get vaccinated. I swear I spent my entire day today and it was so much fun. These kids are amazing. I mean, people worry about without parents there, how are they going to do? I'll tell you what, most of them do better when their parents not there. They find their bravery, and there were a few tears here and there, but mostly really excited kids that were incredibly shocked at how little it hurt or didn't hurt at all for quite a few of them. And as a doctor, I don't get to give vaccines very often, so giving vaccines all day long was kind of fun for me.
We discovered this little shot blocker thing. It's like, have you seen those? It's like this little plastic thing.
Yeah.
It was, it might have been placebo, but whatever. It was magical. It was magical. We've never had such an easy vaccine for him. I'm going to use them every time. And he's to this point that we said really early on, like, there's so many benefits to vaccinate besides not getting COVID. Like, you don't have to quarantine. Your life is not disrupted. Noah is so excited to go have indoor play dates because he has not been like inside somebody else's home in a very, very, very long time. And he's like, can I have an indoor play date? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, I could play video games with my friends. So, there's these intangibles that like return us to normal life. And I think that's what everybody wants.
The grandmas need hugs. They haven't had hugs in too long and they need their hugs, and we need the vaccines for that to be safe.
Yeah. 20,000 doses last Friday, Eve.
Yeah, so
Wow.
CPS shut down school last Friday, like last minute, which was fun for parents, but they wound up giving 20,000 doses was the announcement. Yeah, on Friday, November 12th. It's crazy.
Awesome.
Mhm.
So
It works. Bring vaccines to where people are.
Yeah.
right?
Access, right? Access.
Mhm.
And convenience. There's that 3 C's. I don't remember what the other 2 C's were, but yeah, and the news today was that already 10% of kids 5 to 11 in the US have already been vaccinated in the first 10 days. So this is like really encouraging, because we know from this virus that we need a very, very high percentage of all people vaccinated to reach that herd immunity level. So we're on the way, and I hope it keeps continuing in that direction.
Can't
that our
promise my
cases
kids
reverse
something and then
direction.
take it away. So we have to get on top of this, right? I'm like, we promise, I'm like, get your shots and then we will do normal things and see our family, because they all live on different coasts. And if like adults won't do their part and I have to take that promise away, I'm going to be so mad, you know?
Okay, that was all the questions that came in related to COVID vaccines and kids. People had other questions, but it's 8 o'clock and I don't want to keep you all here all night long. So with that, thank you for the people who showed up for the Zoom. And if you are watching on recording in the future, thank you for watching. That was my little time travel moment. So thank you all so much for joining us and taking this time out of your dinner time to help us out. And that's it. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
for facilitating, Allison, and thank you. This was Allison and Marnie's idea, and thank you both, because it was very informative and educational. Thank you. Thank you all.
Stay well, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.